Hi, I'm Jennifer Maas of Variety, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 92Y Talks event for NBC's The Endgame, starring Morena Baccarin, Ryan Michelle Bathe, written by Margarita Matthews, and executive produced by Julie Plec. The Endgame is a pulse-pounding, high-stakes, two-hander thriller about Elena Fedorova, played by Baccarin, a captured international arms dealer and brilliant criminal mastermind, and her antagonist, Val Turner, played by Bathe, the principled, relentless, and socially outcast FBI agent who will stop at nothing to foil Fedorova's ambitious plans. The gripping heist drama reveals how far some people will go for love, justice, and the most valuable commodity in the world, the truth. So, Julie, I know that the idea for the show came from Nicholas and Jake, but can you walk me through, how you got involved in the project and what drew you to it and how you first heard the idea pitched to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Jake Coburn and I go way back. I think I met him as a baby writer in 2005. Before I was a writer, I was an executive, and I've always thought he had the most brilliant mind, and he's this idea machine. And so he came to me with one page. That was it, one page of a pitch for what this could be. And I said, all right, well, neither you or I are all that awesome at heist stuff. So we're going to need, we can do character all day long, but the heist stuff, I don't know. We're going to need a brain. We're going to need a super brain and a great storyteller and a great set piece writer. And he said, well, what about Nick Wootton, who we, of course, everyone knows because he's had shows on the air and he's known throughout town to be such a great guy. And so he called Nick, pitched the idea to Nick, like 10 seconds in. Nick was like, yep, I'm in, I got it. I totally get it. I want to do it. And then the three of us basically sat together for about 3 weeks and came up with the entire series pitch, broke out all the characters. And the first thing that we did, as you know, because the original document was, as you've seen before, a woman and a man. The man was behind bars and the woman was an FBI agent. And I said, we've seen that a couple of times. And of course I had girl power and things like Killing Eve ringing in my head. And so I just said, would either of you object to making this a story about two women? And they both got very excited about that. And that is how Elena and Val were
Julie,
born.
before you give us way more information than you're supposed to about the originations of this, how did Justin get involved? Because bringing Justin Lin in to direct the pilot obviously gives it a very interesting look, a very specific look from the start about what the Endgame is going to be as a show.
Oh yeah, I mean, we got lucky with that. Justin has an overall deal at Universal Television, which is where our show was the studio for our show. And so they just sent it to him. They send him all their pilots. And he's just in that lucky position in life where he just gets to be like, I want that one. I'll do that one. And so he liked it right away. And then we had to wait like 3 months for him to actually commit to it because of his Fast and the Furious schedule. But he was always on board, like at least creatively, he really wanted to do it. And then finally the dates worked out and we were able to get him. And so that worked out like really, really well. Because not only do you have somebody who is an extraordinary, like cinematic genius and that he can shoot excuse my language, shoot the shit out of things. But also in a show, that's, if you're not going to have a female director, which of course, always would be nice, show about women, like to be able to have a straight, a non-dude, like to just, those are the guys that always get those jobs. And I think it was so exciting to have somebody at the top of their game, super famous for what he does, and a brand in and of itself, come on board to do this.
Morena and Ryan, for you two, the show is described as a two-hander, which I think is actually a very valid and perfect description for this, even though Elena and Val spend so much of the series apart. It's really trading off between you two. So what is it like for you to balance carrying the show independently in so many scenes and having precious little time together in that bunker for what are very pivotal scenes, because the relationship between Val and Elena is so central to everything else going on, but we see so little of it each episode?
I mean, all I have to say is Ryan is definitely carrying more than her fair share of the running around and killing bad guys in the cold New York City. Not killing, I mean, running after bad guys. But yeah, I have a formidable partner there. I think the two of us, we get to sort of tag team and share the load. And I was excited to bust out of Fort Totten, which doesn't happen really till much later in the season, but in order to be able to expand the universe a little bit. But it is central to the story that these two women are opposites and alike in so many ways, that they're out there doing different things that will lead ultimately to kind of the same goal and the same wanting the same things. I don't know if you have something to add to that, Ryan.
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. Yeah. We don't get a lot of time in the bunker, but when we do, I think we both have the same unspoken, we wanted to have the weight that it deserves without it being precious, and I think we work very hard to make that bunker feel lived in, but at the same time not it's interesting because it is a prison. I mean, it is, but I think we both don't want it to feel like a mental prison for these two characters, where it's just kind of like that. It's weird how something becomes the oddest things become very lived in and feel like home.
Having said all that, in episode 7, we get them together the entire time. It's the first time they get any extended period of time together, and they're both locked in and it's in the dark. So I want to ask about filming that episode, what that was like. Lena has a very different take on it immediately than Val. She's like, it's a sleepover. We get to hang out. This is going to be great. So what you guys thought of that episode and having that amount of time together?
It was fun. We had a good time. I mean, it was, I at first, I have to admit, I was reticent of the sleepover humor because what was happening was such high stakes. But then I sort of leaned into it, and having watched the episode since, I think it works actually, and just sort of acts as a pressure valve release in the episode. We had fun. There were some moments where you look at the absurdity of what you're doing. You're like, wait a minute. There's a guy jumping from the ceiling who's going to come in here. We're going to put a landmine, but I think Ryan and I understand, we both have theater backgrounds. Like, we are good at things that are larger than life. I think we're good at giving them, we talk a lot about giving them value and meaning and like centering and anchoring things in a real intention. And we spend a lot of time talking about every scene and how we can further the story along. Yeah.
It was nice to be inside.
Yes.
Oh man.
I spent an entire episode inside. I mean, they spend a lot of time also introducing, I don't want to say too much, another character too. So that's nice because it, and instead of focusing on Val and her background, they make sure that they bring in this other character and her background, which I think is a really interesting way of sort of doing it. But it was nice. It was nice to be indoors. It was nice to be inside, and yeah, there were some fun moments for sure, because we have this absurd situation that we, I think Elena and Val both know that there is some absurdity to it, but I think Val is very hesitant to give in because, once you laugh with the person, I think it's over in terms of a relationship, or, or trying to pretend like you don't have a relationship. Once you start giggling and laughing, I think, so I think Val is like, I can't let her know that she's as funny as she is. Like, I can't let her know that. So I think I fight very hard to, keep, to, as usual, cut off any sort of, humanity and keep it about the FBI of it all. So
there are times Elena broke through, like when Val was like, is that from Pretty Woman? Are you going Pretty Woman right now?
Caught me off guard with that one, but
in that, at the same time, you talk about it is actually very, serious what's going on at the same time. And it comes in after the end of the previous episode where Val watches the man who killed her father or mother die in front of her. And comes to Elena and talks to her about it. And Elena's like, well, I knew that you'd be there, and he has that every night. And that underlying and everything else that these two women are doing in the next episode, having to put a pin in that because of all this, what can you tease about how that's going to come back around? And that's when I'm coming to you, Margarita, as well, for episode 8, which I know you directed.
Right. Did not direct.
Right. All right, Morena and Ryan for the Isaac Bigby part of it, and then Margarita will go to you for episode 8.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm usually running around New York, so my memory could be a little fuzzy, but I don't ever remember it coming back. I don't think it comes back in a real sort of like conversational way. I think it gets mentioned one time, but definitely not in episode 8, I don't believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the challenge of the show is it moves so fast and things happen and you have to sort of like let them go to move on to the next problem. I know Val is constantly having things thrown at her. And I think there would have been a much larger conversation about the morality of, aiding her and getting rid of him, whether she wanted it or not. But we don't really have the time to go into it.
Yeah, I would say that with the man who killed Val's mom, that once we as an audience discover that just kind of informs our understanding of who Val is from that point forward in, I think, a much more profound way. Because I think what's so interesting about Val and Elena is ultimately where they find their common ground, right? Because these women are so different, come from completely different pasts, and yet they have these incredibly traumatic pasts. And there's this sort of I see you that comes from that. And I think that, through this whole Isaac Bigby, the man who killed her mother storyline, what we get to see is, Val discovers that Elena will do anything for her daughter, right? And Val doesn't have a daughter, but Val is a daughter who lost her mom, tragically when she was young. And so despite the fact that she's an FBI agent dealing with an international arms dealer, right? She feels for that child. And I think that, Val doesn't want that child to grow up in a world without her mom, no matter, how messy her mom might be. And so, I think Ryan and Morena do such a beautiful job of sort of infusing that tenderness into this very fast-paced, action-y kind of heist show,
To that, Margarita, and for you as well, Julie, Morena already mentioned, and Val, Ryan has a hard time even remembering where Val is in things, what the storyboarding process was like, and knowing like, here's what we know now, and here's what we don't know, and going back to this, or we're not going back to this, and you're just gonna have to wait and see what happens with that. Keeping track of all those threads, and what you guys can say about how much you had to do that throughout season 1 and where you kind of ended for season 1 with all of those threads.
Yeah, I mean, at the very center, we had our, writers will know, writers room pro, we had all that. It was a virtual room. So we had all of that up on our board, and we had all those storylines sort of written out. And at the very core of this is the, Val and Elena relationship. That's the core of this show. On the surface, it looks like a heist show, and it is, but when you peel back that layer, it's the story of the friendship between these two women, the unlikely friendship between these two women. So we kind of had that in bold, in the very center of this thing. We called it Valena, because that was the core of this. So I think, that was always the thing that we started with. And then we would sort of put the heist stuff on top of that and kind of talk about, well, who are we taking down this week? Who's the bad guy? And how's that bad guy going to be taken down? And what creative thing can we do to take that bad guy down? And you get to see all of that. But, for us, I think our room was 100% women. From very different backgrounds. And for us, the background of Val and the background of Elena and how they come together was just so profoundly important, and the nuances of that were so important that I think for all of us that was the most important thing. I think sometimes just because it is a fast-paced show, some things get sort of left on the cutting room floor, and then we have to scoop them up and hope we can pick up later. And I think that's something that we're hoping for in the next season, should we get one, that we could really get to sort of let some of those things breathe a little bit more and spend more time, because I think the Valena scenes, we all love those scenes and the most, I think, and so we'd love to see more of that.
Julie, I mean, I know you come from a genre background, so you're used to keeping track of a million threads and mythology and everything. But yeah, for you, what that is as well.
Well, that's why we hired Nick Wootton to do this job, because it takes a certain kind of brain that can hold not just information, but the weave of the mechanics of plotting, like just to be able to sit up here, pay something off there, to have 6 different things happening all at once across multiple storylines, to build a big arc for the season, plus an entry point for a second season, which of course we didn't sell this with just one season pitch because no one would have put it on the air. So to then be thinking ahead to where the second season goes, he's along with his incredible staff of women, which Margarita mentioned, which I love so much, has really done a good job with that. And I would like to say, I went back while we were talking and I looked at the original pitch document. Elena was a woman. Val was a John McClane type detective.
That makes a lot of sense now. It explains everything is now come now. I wish I had known that 5 months ago. My life would have been so much easier. The struggle that I've been going through this past 5 months.
That's so funny.
Completely obliterated. That
oh my God.
That's
that's
why I sound like a old Black man from the 70s all the time. Now it makes sense.
for Jakey, I don't want to steal like all the spotlight, but it does say John McClane type detective parentheses man or woman. So I only had like a partial influence there. I've overstated my importance in that moment. But yes.
I think your importance sealed the deal.
Well, you know what? Here's the thing. I was speaking of the Isaac Bigsby thing. I was just looking at episode 6 last night, and the moment when Val goes to the porch, and she's already talked about like wanting to kill Elena. She's always already talked about like the anger that she holds, and she gets to that porch, and you're like, what is she gonna do? And then she tells him what he did. She tells, which is like a foundation of transformative justice, which is a really great thing. The idea of like, if you have a show about women written by a lot of women, you're gonna find your way to that moment where this lead character can either like take out her gun and shoot him cold blood, or she can express in an emotional way what he did and what he took from her. And Margarita, I wanted to throw that back at you because obviously I wasn't in the room. Like, how did that happen? Because I love that.
No, I mean, I'm laughing because there were so many times that we wanted to kill these people off, and I earned the nickname Murderita as a result, because I was like, or we shoot the man. And then and each time we had to talk ourselves off and be like, no, let him live. And so we talked ourselves, there's a rage there that I think exists for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Just from, I think we all felt that in the room. And when we had an opportunity to express that rage, we were like, let's do it. And then we would take some deep breaths and we were like, okay, so what would Val do? And what would, because she's just such a hero in this story. And I think that anytime we try to take her over the line where she crosses that line into an amoral sort of place, it doesn't feel right. She's just got such a good heart. And, that doesn't mean she's not, isn't upset about the things that have happened to her. But, I think in episode 8 was the farthest that we ever sort of pushed her, where she was really ready to kind of sell Elena out. And even that we had to pull back. And Ryan collaboratively even was like, wait a minute, I don't know that Val would do this. Like, Val cares about children, and especially, in this case, Elena's child, in a way that would not have her cross this line. And so I think that at the end of the day, it all comes down to character. What would Val do? What would Elena do? And, you just kind of have that tattooed on your forehead, WWVD,
We've talked a lot about the importance of the relationship between Val and Elena, which is at the center of the story, but both of them are in marriages, very different marriages at this time, and both separated from their husbands throughout all of this. Morena and Ryan, how would you say that those relationships, which you're separated from, except for in flashbacks for Elena, affect you in the present? And what you're doing there, given that you're keeping this person in mind, they're affecting you in a certain way, but Elena is communicating with her husband a little bit, and Val is not, like, she's not been able to see Owen since they're like awkward.
I think, unfortunately, Val gets very, she's out of the loop in a sense. She's thinking something that's happening that isn't really, not until the end, and then she has so much to process in like 10 pages at the end of the show of like finally knowing everything. But for Elena and in creating this character, for me, the family, the daughter and the husband it's her life. It's her reason for being. It's her reason for doing everything that she's doing. And she states over and over again in the show that she just wants a normal life with her family. She wants to be able to take her kid to the park and go home. And something as simple as that. And that's really a humanity that I think is important in making this not a caricature and not an evil international arms dealer. Really what's the word I'm looking for? Humanizes. Thank you. I was like, humanifies. What am I talking about? Not enough sleep. Humanizes who this character is. And I think at the end of the show, it's very interesting to see these two examples of these marriages that are very strong. And the reason why we have Val in the picture is because of how her husband talked about her as such an incredible woman and what she's capable of. And it's something that attracted Elena to this couple. I also think it's very funny that when the show ends, you have this passionate reuniting of Sergei and Elena, and Val wanting that moment with her husband so badly, but then feeling betrayed and having to deal with all of those emotions. It's marriage, and it's a story about women in a relationship.
That Val is basically a man makes so much sense. That's what I'm processing, because I'm like, it explains everything to me. Like the whole time I've been like, I've had to really kind of come to the conclusion for me in order to play Val that she's not a woman, she's not a Black woman, she's not anything but an FBI agent, and that's the only way to get through the day, because I don't have time. Val doesn't have time, there's nowhere in there that she processes anything that is happening to her. I begged them, like, please, like, can I at least say Owen's name like once? Like, this horrible thing has happened, I think. And I even said to somebody, I was like, I'm a woman. If I find out that my husband is playing for the other team, somebody's having some nookie ookies. I was like, is that why he's hanging out with Elena? Because I think Sergei is dead. And I'm like, so why'd you toss me overboard to go hang out with Elena? I don't know what's going on. And I was like, I think any woman who's married to a man is going to be like, is there some snooky ookums going on? Who's getting the snooky ookums? Because I'm not getting snooky ookums. So, and I haven't had snooky ookums in a year. So who's getting snooky ookums?
Well, neither have I, to be fair.
To be fair, you haven't either. But I don't know that. I'm like, maybe you're getting your snooky ookums from, I don't know who. Somebody's getting some snooky ookums is all I know. And so as a woman, I'm like, that's what I would be thinking about. But I know that it's John McClane. I guess John McClane is just like, look, I don't care. I'm an FBI agent and I'm taking down that guy.
It was John McClane in the one page pitch. It was John McClane. Before Nick.
She's taking this to heart, Julie. She's taking it to heart.
Never going to be able to unhear that.
It was this way for 1 minute.
No, but I will tell you that everything you're saying, Ryan, is like, I'm getting flashbacks to The Room, because it was everything you're saying. Well, wait a minute, if I find out this, like, what did she say this and when did she do that? And all that stuff totally exists. I think it really is the unfortunate thing of sometimes the plot things get cut. And it's like the number of times that we have been like, Owen, you know, we got to touch base with Owen, we got to do whatever, we got to write a conjugal visit. Like, I mean, the number of times that these things were on the table and we were all excited and the showrunner was excited and we all wanted to, you know, see it. And it's just, we have X number of minutes and, you know, season 1, we got to get through the plot. And so, I mean, your frustration is definitely shared. We want Val to be unleashed.
Not frustrated. Val she just wants to know who's getting the Snooki Yookums. That's all she wants to
know. So maybe we just stay on this John McClane train. But I was wondering, you know, I mean, fashion is a huge component in the show, at least for Elena. When is Val gonna get in time to get dressed?
Stay on the job. What is John? At least I have on shoes. John McClane had.
I don't know. I was noticing those episodes, and I was like, she got cuter. Like she's got a little jacket going on. She's got some scarves.
Well, you have to start somewhere, right? With girl, you have to start in opposite places.
I mean, I don't know how many FBI agents you've seen looking stylish. I haven't seen a one.
No, that's the problem. The FBI uniform is the standard uniform, the freaking polyester blazer, whatever, is the least flattering thing you could put a human being in. But if you take too many liberties in a show about FBI, especially a show about a female FBI agent, if you take liberties, suddenly you're like Barbie dolling the authenticity of the profession. It's a terrible predicament from a perspective of fashion, because you're like basically negating the validity of like the profession if you try to like zhuzh up the look.
That's a very interesting actually point and conversation in general, right? I mean, my character has the liberty to do whatever she wants because she's
yeah, she has the Mary Poppins magical bag.
International arms dealer, you know.
So many clothes are in
yes, the magical trunk. There's too many outfits in there.
And a steamer in there. There has to be like we really should have had a gag where there was like when I go in at the end, there's like a steamer or an ironing, like a little old like ironing board.
I think there should be a little man in there who's like ironing my outfits.
A little sailor that's just like, don't tell Elena, but I must keep sewing. I wish she could have been here because our Rosemary is amazing. I would just jaw drop on the floor. Like it was my favorite part of the day was like the first time I would see Morena for the day because it was always just, it was almost like it was such a good thing to play against because I just remember the one time you wore those earrings that were bigger than your ears.
Yeah, it was like the star thing. Yeah,
they were so great. And I was like, and how hard must it be to find all of those different shades of blue? Like, I think to me, that's the biggest part about the fashion is that like, it's not just fashion. It's like, it's so specific, you know, because it's the Federova blue. And she does this amazing job of finding all of these. Remember the one where you wore with the stripes because it had the blue stripe?
Yeah, the disco suit. I call that the disco suit.
Dude, like how, like, I don't know. You speak on it because
it was fun. It was a blast. I mean, originally, and you're probably tired of hearing this story, but in the pilot, I ended up finding the dress by complete coincidence. I had a doctor's appointment and I had 10 minutes to spare, and I walked into Carolina Herrera and I saw this blue dress on a mannequin, and I was like, no, that's not going to be right for this character. And then I tried it on and I took a photo, and the gag became like, let's try to find a dress better than this, and we couldn't. And it just became, the character kind of grew almost out of that dress also. And then the rest of the season became about like, well, then where does she go from here? Like, it's got to be more utilitarian. We wanted that dress to be the statement. And then after that, you see her sort of like business attire, you know, which was really fun to create. And I have to say, I would have gone even further. I mean, Rosemary and I would like try to fight some battles with the studio about, you know, how far we can go. I wanted her in capes all the time. I just thought it would be such a cool, like, you know, like, you know, just to a superhero, but not really, like, but like fashionable Valentino capes. And, you know, we got away with one. And I just wanted like that sort of staple thing that she always wore. Anyway, it was so much fun, and Rosemary was, you know, just fantastic. I don't know where she would dig these things out of, and you know, it was a time in New York where people were just starting to shop again. I mean, it was kind of like a dead zone, and she really found amazing stuff.
I think it became almost like armor. Like it became this thing that, you know, Elena, that's how Elena keeps the world out in a way, if you really think about it. I think it's really kind of, I think there's a lot to it.
It's a good distraction. And especially in scenes like the flashback in Argentina where she's in this pristine white suit and you think like, oh, there's a lady that just wants to talk. And then she pulls out a huge gun and is like shooting everybody up. And I think she knows the effect that she has on people, and then she plays with it or against it, depending on how it's going.
Totally. And I think with Val, you know, they start on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And as they kind of come towards each other as friends and, you know, in seasons to come, maybe, who knows, maybe we'll start to see Val pick up a little more, you know what I mean? Like subconsciously, who knows, right? Like when we start to become friends with someone, maybe, you know, maybe some shoes.
Now we just maybe graduate to lipstick. We'll you know, let's one little thing at a time. Like, it's like, wow, I'm on national television in chapstick. This isn't, I mean, listen, as a woman, it was like, it's been a very interesting thing to have to learn. I was like, so, okay, wow. Like it's been a journey for me in that respect. But now I'm used to it. I'm like, give me the turtlenecks and the chapstick and let's go. Let's rock and roll. Like, it can't get any worse. I mean, maybe
well, it is interesting where like they're both very powerful women, you know? And I think the promos did such a great job of when they say like Battle of the Queen, you're sort of like, yeah, which one? You know, I think these women are strong differently. Like Elena's using sex appeal and power suits and accent and whatever else. And Val is using this internal strength and this like, you know, she's fighting against everybody and she's like just trying to be heard and seen and, you know, and she's not just a chick with a gun, like she's got gusto and like smarts and she's putting all the pieces together when all these dudes I love so much in the pilot and in the second episode, especially when like she's getting all the information and she's putting it together and all the other guys are just like, how'd you, oh yeah, okay. You know, it's great. I mean, it's power, it's female power in two very different ways, I feel like.
You know, it's actually really funny because I won't name who, because I'm in trouble already. I've been here for 30 minutes and I'm in trouble.
Checked it, we're good.
Somebody said, you know, gosh, it's just like, is there a way that the show doesn't have to be, that the women don't have to be so much about their men? And early on in the process, and I was like, and it made me as a woman feel insecure as a female storyteller because I'm like, I don't want a show where women are defined by men. So have I done something wrong in the way that I'm looking at this? And then I really dug in and I'm like, no, these women are warriors for their family. And a woman should be able to fight for her man or woman or whatever, her child, her squad, her parents, or whatever, and be that kind of warrior without somebody from the outside looking in and saying, oh, well, she's all about her man. And it's funny how we, even as storytellers, defend ourselves as women all the time, because I thought for a minute that I had like misperceived the feminist core of this thing by making really wanting to lean into the love stories of both women and these marital relationships and the power of those two stories. So it's hard to be female, really.
I really love that you just said that. I think I get caught in that constantly where I am reading scripts and I'm like, do I like this character because she's weak or because she's strong? Like and it's both. You know, we can't be women without being in love or frustrated in love or out of love and wanting to be in love. This is who we are, wanting to be mothers, not wanting to be mothers, resenting being mothers. Like these are stories that are a part of being female. And I think to ignore that is to write a show, you know, like a guy, if Sergei was saving the day, we would say, well, that's sexist because he's standing up for his woman. But then it's like, well, why shouldn't he? You know, he's coming in and doing what he needs to do, and then I'm coming in and doing what I need to do. And it's just reality, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not a weakness. But from an outsider's perspective, a non-female perspective, they can perceive it as a weakness in character, and it's not. It's literally the definition of being a woman. It's wild. I'm
Well,
having
and
a
also
very
men are very much
illuminated.
able to do whatever they want to do without being a stand-in for all men. You know, there's entire, you know, Arthurian legend is all based on a man who wants to save and be in love with a woman. And it's like you can study it and get a PhD in it, and it's elevated, right? Like, I mean, you know, all of everything, or they cannot, or they can save their children, or they cannot, but they don't have to stand in for all men because there's so many of them in these lead roles, so they can do and explore all of that. So I think it's really interesting that we have two of us, and we just have two sides of femininity that we get to explore. But we're all very excited about it because we don't normally get that, you know, that doesn't get the real estate, you know.
Yeah, to have both the yin and the yang all at once is nice.
Speaking about gender, you know, Ryan, I don't know how much research you had to do to dive into what being a woman in the FBI is like. And then Morena, I have no idea how you research being an international arms dealer, like to begin with, let alone like gender of an international.
Well, I had a wonderful, Veronica Maxwell was our FBI consultant, and she had been in the FBI for, I think, 25 years before she retired. And so in her retirement, we got lucky because she came, and Margarita, I know she was in the writer's room a couple times, or the writer's Zoom room. And she was just really great. She availed herself of herself. Anyway, the point is that she was very available, and she was great. And so she just kind of, and we ended up going to the FBI headquarters in New York. You know, we went down to the federal building, and we saw both. Like it was really great. And so come to find out that the FBI actually really does want as much of a diverse group of people as they can, because if you think about all of like going undercover and having people trust you is a huge part of what they do in terms of like solving these crimes. And, you know, they were like, if you send in Doak, for instance, you know, Doak sticks out like a sore thumb no matter where he's going, unless it's, you know, I don't know, Harvard or Yale. But, you know, there's like, when you only have one specific type of agent, it actually narrows their scope and what they can and cannot do. So when we were there, I mean, there were tall ones and short ones and men and women. And one woman had been a circus performer.
Wow.
She had been a circus performer and was able to infiltrate a biker gang because of her sort of like alternative, like, you know, experience. It was, so I never looked at it that way. You know, I always thought it would be such a fight, and it is a fight for women no matter what, because we just said it's hard being female, but, and, you know, J. Edgar Hoover had to die before they let women into the FBI. Like he literally had to die. He not just retire, he had to die. And that's the year after he died was when they first started letting in women into Quantico. So that's the legacy.
Very cool. I didn't know you actually got to go. That's so cool.
Yeah, that was really cool.
I didn't have a retired illicit arms dealer to talk to. But that would have been really cool. I have to say that the majority of my work was researching background and story, trying to keep the plot straight with her backstory. It was very complicated, and the accent, really like learning that, and then finding what kind of a person she was through those, you know, through those colors. But I flying by the seat of my pants.
Margarita, for that, you know, given how much of the story takes place outside of the US and culture and dealing with all of that, what that was like in the writer's room, you know, figuring out what does this look like? How do we accurately portray this life?
Yeah, well, I mean, as fate would have it, I'm actually from the part of the world that Elena is from. I was born right at the fall of the Soviet Union in Russia. So it was, I mean, which is where our story starts in the pilot. So Morena, I actually really love your accent. So great.
Oh, thank you.
I really enjoy it. That's
high
something
praise.
that has always bothered me on TV is like these sort of like, hello, like Russian accents. And I'm like, I really enjoy, I think Morena's is very, it's, it sounds like my mom's accent sounds like.
Oh, good.
It really,
compliment. Thank you.
It really, I really enjoy it. So, I mean, for us, we had, I mean, we were, I don't know if I can't remember if I already said this or not, but we just had such a diverse group. We had, I think, people from all over the country. I mean, from LA to New York to Puerto Rico to, I mean, and then we also had from multiple countries. We had India, Japan represented, I mean, like the UN in there. And so it just, I think because of that, I mean, I think one person obviously can't represent an entire culture, but it certainly helps to have a lived experience. And that's kind of what we were striving to do in terms of accuracy, is sort of just bring in our own personal experiences. And that Pretty Woman thing, that is something that the writer of that episode reached out and was like, what was dubbed in your, back then, like what was something that you might have had? And that was something we had. We had Pretty Woman dubbed. Everyone knew Richard Gere. The dubbing was terrible. It was awful.
Same in Brazil, by the way. Same.
Exactly. Like one person doing all the voices. So you have no idea who's talking, and they're just talking over the voices. It's fantastic. But and that's how people kind of got to know American media a lot of the time. So that's a real thing. When Sergey talks about, in episode 108, he mentions golubцы, which is a food that I'm never going to hear that on TV. Some, obscure, Ukrainian, Russian food. Like, no, but that was something that we got to include. And I know that, there was an episode where we had an Indian woman named Arushi, and we have an Indian American writer in the room who taught us how to say her name. We made sure everyone knew. Ryan's probably laughing because I'm sure that the writer on set was like telling you.
Exactly. Lisa was on set, and we practiced and I practiced and practiced because she was like, every little Indian girl is gonna be, but like you're all their hopes and dreams are riding on you saying this right. And I was like, well, kill me now.
I mean, it's small, but it's, that's the micro for the macro, right? Is maybe little Arushi, in Illinois is going to watch this and be seen. And that's, it's a small version of what we're trying to do on a bigger scale with this, which is just kind of represent, all of our different backgrounds and cultures in a way that I think we just don't get to see, on TV.
Speaking of 108, Margarita, and bringing in, we got in 7, we saw the baby, but we haven't seen the daughter at that point yet. And what Morena, what your character's daughter looks like, and who that person is. And we've been building to that since the premiere, when there was just the hint at she actually had a child. So what was it like in breaking that and acting that as well? Because, holding the baby, I guess, is one thing, from knowing who this, actual child of these two people are, the person they're fighting for, that all of this is being done for.
I mean, unfortunately, in network television, there's such little time that it's literally like, hi, how you doing? You're playing my daughter? Okay, great. Come sit over here. We're going to start our scene. There's not a lot of interaction we got to have beforehand, but and we couldn't have a real baby because of COVID. So that was also very frustrating to act with a doll. But true story, my daughter is 6 and in real life, and she was really vying for the role. And I was like, come to me when you're 10. If you still want to do this, we'll talk. There's no way I'm throwing you into this show.
Totally on your daughter's side, by the way. You know that. I was like, are you sure? Because she's so cute.
I just kept having like major anxiety about like, what if she's the one holding us up on set and I've got to talk her through it? Don't want to be in that position. But anyway, the little girl, Paisley, who plays my daughter, is very sweet. And but it's hard, at that age, it's very hard to form that bond and really like, I've worked with kid actors before, not this young, I don't believe. And they're just kids, and you have to make a connection on their level. And it's a hard thing to do when you're rushing. And I just find I'm lucky I have I have 3 kids, but 2 that are around that age. And so I could really like relate to her and talk to her. But I found myself sometimes having to service her in the scene because she's young and she's just trying to get her lines out. And so I really want more time to be able to explore that relationship and really make it land. I think honestly, in all truthfulness, we could have spent more time had we had it in really figuring out who this kid is. Like I remember she showed up and she didn't have an accent, and you can't teach a 6-year-old an accent. And it was a conversation that I had to have very last minute with Nick about what do we do? Like, how do we have her just be this little American girl with her 2 parents having an accent? And she's only 6, like, which means that she grew up in Belarus or Ukraine or wherever we're saying this family's from now. But we just threw in a few words here and there and tried to make it seem like she'd grown up mostly, going to boarding school or foreign countries. But these are things that I think ultimately the story, in the moment you have to be creative about it. You have to like make it work. And these are muscles that you have to flex when you're doing TV like this, where like you can't unravel because the 6-year-old doesn't have an accent or because you haven't had enough time to connect with them, and you've got to get through the scene and get through the day. And I think a lot of those scenes turned out really beautiful because the story, you've laid the foundation and the groundwork for what's coming. And so you buy it, and you get into it. But it's very hard. It's very challenging.
I thought you did beautifully just watching those scenes. And, it is challenging too, because there are laws about how much time a kid can spend on set, on top of everything. But the good news is that, with theoretically, she could have been going to, an international school, which she probably would have with the amount of, money that, Sergey and Elena had.
And to keep her safe, right?
Yeah, to keep her safe. So that was kind of how I had to justify it in my mind when, and I think Paisley's just adorable, and it all came together. But yeah, I'm sure it was, an uphill battle to get through all those things.
I'm gonna ask about where things are headed for a potential season 2, given that the show is called The Endgame. How long can the Endgame go on before we get to the Endgame?
What a great question to ask someone who can't really say anything about it.
No, I think
it's just season 2.
The Endgame is peace, right? The Endgame for Elena is safety. The Endgame for Val is justice and understanding the root of her marriage and the lies that led up to all this. And so, yes, Elena has an endgame in this season, which is, her kill list, basically. That will take them all to a certain place where season 2 will be now moving us towards her ultimate emotional endgame. And then there are ways that it could continue for many other seasons as these 2 women find their way back to, the things that they're fighting so hard for. And develop this, again, not to over reference Killing Eve, but like that is a very, very strong dynamic between those 2 women on that show. And there's an endless amount of situations you could put them in together moving forward. So I think there's a lot, and I can't say anything more either. 1, because it could all change, and 2, because I'll get even more in trouble. But circling back, we did it very much pitch what season 2 would be when we sold this show, because it's so hyper serialized. And when you're dealing with broadcast and network television, like everyone gets super scared about hyper serialized stuff. So they want to know that it can sustain. So it can.
We did, by the way, the last week of shooting, keep calling it the never ending game, because we kept having to push our finish date due to unforeseen COVID related issues, and it just felt like we were never going to finish.
Yep.
And yet you all started shooting the show and wrapped the show, and it will have aired completely in a tighter window than the other show I'm working on, which has been shooting for 10 months and is still like, we haven't even blocked the pilot episode yet. So that is the beauty of broadcast, even though creatively you're always out of time. You never have enough money. You never have enough time. And I mean, not just to shoot it, but to put it in the episode, because the running times are so rigid. You can't be a second over. So all of that nuance is the stuff that, like, if you're not careful, ends up on the cutting room floor, which is so frustrating. But the good thing is you get done. It gets aired. You see it get made. You get like direct feedback, like in real time. And that, I think, is, there's still something to be said for that.
I just want to know if Morena wants to get Elena out of the bunker and if Ryan wants Val to get some backstory or get a chance to step out of just her current frantic running around the city.
I have a feeling it's going to be, I don't know. And I saw the last episode and I have absolutely, I was like, well, I guess the end game is over because I don't know how they're going to do a season 2. And I literally was like, the only thing that, I was like, honestly, I was like, is it an anthology? Do we go to another country? Is it another Val Turner? I have no idea. So I'm looking forward to finding that out just as much as anybody else. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm just going to keep on with my little jetpack and keep zooming around Manhattan. And I can only pray for better weather. And maybe, maybe I can convince the network to let me wear some really good, since we, sturdy shoes with the fur, because you could see like on the inside, I'd see this lining of fur. And I was like, their feet aren't cold. I was like, oh, where do they get those boots? So maybe I can
production about get Ryan.
About those good boots. I want the good boots.
Well, I mean, yeah, you had every weather element thrown at you and you were always outside, always. Because here's the problem, right? When you just think of the math of production, if you have one character who's always inside, then the only way you're getting scope in the world is that every other scene that's not at Fort Totten needs to be out on the streets. Otherwise, you're going to feel like a claustrophobic show shot in a box. And so Ryan got all those scenes in the middle of a crazy New York winter. I don't envy that at all. But it looks good.
Really beautiful, though. Some of it, I mean, New York is a beautiful place to shoot. Like it is, I mean, no matter what the weather is, like there is a beauty to it. And like having those bridges and just some of like, there's really no place like it. And you can always tell when it's authentically New York and not, or someplace like Toronto, or no knock to those cities, because they, everybody does a great job doing what we do best and make believe, but there is something really special about filming in New York. So I was honored to walk those streets knowing that, and the best part about New York is that New Yorkers don't care. There's always some like 19-year-old kid standing on a street telling some 75-year-old woman that she can't go to her apartment, and she's like, kid, do you know how old I am? Get out of here, scram, in the middle of the scene. Just stop and, people are cursing at us going by, get out of here, yeah. I'm like, I love this city.
Thanks so much for joining us for this special 92Y Talks event with Morena Baccarin, Ryan Michelle Bathe, Margarita Matthews, and Julie Plec.